script. So whenever you're programming in QB Core, there is a line of code that you need at the top of every document. You have to have local QB Core equals exports squares QB Core colon get core object bracket bracket. You have to have that at the top of every script you write for QB Core. You can also put it in the in a shared document without the local, but I just do it this way with the local because then I just make sure I have this at the top of every single page that I've ever created. And the reason you have to have that is whenever you use like a QB core dot functions, let's say dot notify hello world success. So if you tried to do this function and you don't have this at the top, you're just going to get an error message and it's going to tell you an undefined variable QB core. So basically, this is just like your config table you were making. QB core actually equals this. And so whatever is inside these brackets is get core object, and then the function from the get core object notify, and then that's the stuff that's the variables you're sending over. But I mean, bottom line is to use any of the QB core dot functions, you have to have that at the top of your script. And I have beat that dead horse because it's the easiest thing to forget and not be able to figure out why your stupid script's not working. All right, so I'm going to create a variable called refund, and it's going to be called refund timer, and that's going to be a timer I set that will, if it expires, they won't be able to get a refund from the fee that they paid. So that's just a variable. I set it as equal to 0 to begin with. Okay, now I'm gonna ask real quick, Lemon, and you can tell me what people say. Do you want me to sit here and type this all in because it goes slower and it's easier to understand, or do you want me to paste segments and explain it and then paste the next segment? How does everybody want me to do it?
I think go slower.
Okay. All right.
That was like the
I don't
first
know
thing
how
that
much
came up.
time people have, and I've
Type it
already
out.
wasted an hour. So
Slow is good. Yeah, everyone is saying
You may
slower.
think that it's a waste, but it's not a waste for us.
Yeah.
We're taking in all the information, and it's
okay.
as
All
long
right.
as you got the time, I think we got the time.
I got all
Yeah.
night. So all right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create all of the targets, all of the, well, we're going to create the PED. We're going to create mod whenever the player logs in. So we have to create a function. There's 3 different ways to do a function. You can do function, you just gotta be lowercase. You can do, see, this is why I haven't been typing because my typing sucks. You can do function, and then it would be like create PED, create PEDs, and open close, and then you come down and you put end, and then you can create a function that way. That's one way to do it. The next way is to do register net event, and you just give it a name, something, and then you have to do a comma, and then you do your function, and then end. So that's the next way to do it. For what we're wanting to do right now, I'm going to, there's already a function written in QB Core called client on player loaded. And what I want is to create the PED whenever the player logs in. So, oh, there's one more way to create a function also. It's called create thread. And then create thread is just like that function. You don't have to have all that. So if you have create thread, what happens is as soon as the server starts up, it launches this function. Like as soon as you restart the server and it starts, it launches this function. The reason we don't want to do it this way for whenever we're creating a PED is the PEDs are created. If you were creating a server PED, you could use this method because it exists on the server. But like I said, we're going to be creating a client PED for this example. And so if we did it this way, whenever you log in, you wouldn't see the PED because the client doesn't know to create that PED. And that may be confusing right now. It'll make more sense the more and more classes that we do because this is the key to writing any code is creating your functions. So for this particular example, I want to create the PED whenever the player logs into the server. So I'm going to add an event handler. And what this means is it is going to launch whenever, let me go ahead and type it in here and then I'll talk about it a little bit. QB core client on player loaded. Okay. And that was predictive text that I don't need. Okay, so, and you always have to have, I just always go ahead whenever I create a function like this, and then I go ahead and add the end at the bottom just so you don't have all the highlights because your syntax is bad because you have now created a function and it has an end, and so anything we put in here is going to execute. So in QB Core, there is already a function called client on player loaded, and that recognizes whenever the player has loaded into the server. And so whenever that happens, because I added an event handler, then it's going to know whenever a player loads into the server, we're going to launch this. It's the same as doing a create thread, except it doesn't launch until the player has loaded into the server. We're going to create variable XYZ. And to do that, we're going to table.unpack. I'm going to copy this because I'm going to do a little bit of copying just because it's faster and I don't want to do typos. So basically what this is telling the script is it's going to look at the variable I put in config as I've discussed earlier. So config lesson1 locations, random interaction point chords. And it's going to unpack, since I have XYZ with commas like this is a table, and so it's going to return each one of the iterations of the table. And I'll flip back over there so you can see what I'm talking about. Let me close that one, close that one, close that one. Okay, so table unpack is just telling the script to reference this table and unpack it into 3 variables. So if you go back to the config, we're looking at lesson locations, random interaction point. So config.lesson locations, random interaction points, chords, and then the chord is a table, a vector3 table. So there's X, there's Y, and there's Z. So now in my client side from this table unpack, this is actually now is the same as saying X equals minus 1054, Y equals minus 242.77, and Z equals 44.01. So that's why I created the config, because now that's where my chords are going to be. I don't have to come over here and edit anything. If I want to change the location of the PED, I just change the chords right here. And it already knows what to do because I told it to with that variable definition. All right, and so the next variable I'm going to use is going to be called local vec3. The reason why I'm creating a vec3 coordinate is because this table unpack is xyzh, and those are individual points, but you can use vector 3s in another part that we'll talk about in a second. Anyway, vector 3 is going to be x comma y comma z. So I'm basically recreating this could also, instead of doing it this way, you could also just say vector 3 equals that, but you wouldn't want a table unpack. In fact, we'll just go ahead and do it this way. So basically what I'm telling you is that this variable vector 3 is the same as, so I'm going to put a note here. Let's see, I'll do a note. X comma y vec 3 is the same as vector 3 x comma y comma z. And I'll put that right here. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand that? And it's from the config. So it's the same as this. So let's just copy that. and that equals this. In fact, I'm going to
Okay.
leave those
I think
notes
it
in
makes sense.
for the folder because that's pretty clear. Um, that's pretty explanatory. So yeah, you can do it either way. All right. All right. So I'm not going to go back and review the documentation again, but in the documentation on QB target, it tells you how to do an export, and that's what we're going to use for our QB target. And instead of putting this all into the init Lua, this is how we generally create third eye interaction points. As the question was earlier, is it all in the init Lua? And the answer was no, because this is how we normally do it. And let me see, for this one, I'm going to do an add box zone. And I don't want to type all of this, so I'm going to actually paste it in and then explain it. Okay, so we're adding a box zone, so it's going to be referenced, and that's why we had to have the polyzone stuff here, box zone. So it's going to go to polyzone box zone and get the information it needs for what to do with this data. And then the name of the location, this is basically a label, is going to be random interaction point. It's going to be vector 3, which is, as we've already discussed, it's the same as vector 3 xyz, and it's the same as vector 3, so it's actually these coordinates right here. The x, y, and z coordinates is what this variable is. 2 is the width, I believe, and 2 is the height, because we're adding a box zone, so it's width and length. So you can change the size of the box here. Honestly, it should be a float. So we'll go ahead and make it a float. You should never use whole numbers like that. I'm pretty sure you should always use a float. The name of the interaction point, this is the same as the config file we were looking at earlier. It's always name it the same as whatever my label is. So random interaction point. Heading is 0.0, so it's going to be facing straight north and south. I said debug poly true, so it's actually going to draw my poly zone in the server. My min z, I'm just taking the coordinates that I used from this xyz right here whenever I did the unpack. So it's taking z and it's subtracting 1 meter from it. That's going to be the lower area, and then the max z is going to be +1. So basically I have a 2 meter tall box because I've got -1 and +1 from the center of the coordinates. And so I'll have a 2 meter box that you can third eye. And then for options, the really nice thing about putting in the config is that I don't have to type out all that stuff every time. So if I have multiple objects that I'm going to third eye with, instead of having to type in all the options that were listed, whenever we were doing the init.lua, that's the reason we don't use the init.lua. I should point that out. Because you would have to do a config.options for every single PED that you wanted to drop. Whereas I can drop multiple PEDs using this method and give them all the same options from the config file. So you'll remember this is what we entered in the init.lua. So if you use the init.lua to create all your QB targets, you have to re-enter this information for every new target that you create. Whereas if you use the export, you can do multiple PEDs with the same exact options, if that makes sense. And then distance equals 2.0. That's just how far away you have to be before you can get the third eye option. If you want to, whenever you're in VS Code, one thing that you can do is you'll have underlines if you have anything messed up. Like say I missed this comma right here. You can see it's telling me, hey, something's wrong, and what's wrong is the comma. If I'm missing this curly bracket, it's going to say, oh, look, you've got stuff missing. You got underlines, and you know that you've got a problem. So that helps. But still, there are times where you can have a really complex table and you miss curly brackets. So it's important one thing I like to do is I'll click like on my function start and make sure that the end is highlighted. So I know that I've enclosed everything that's there. Like for the table unpack, you can click there and you see the squares show you where the start and stop is. What's another one? For the exports, okay, start and stop, and then this stops here. This is all of the option stuff inside the export. We got to stop there. So we look good. We're in good shape here. All right, so